Hey everyone. It looks like we've got a pretty good number of folks here, so I'm probably
Sure,
going to
son.
get started in just a minute. Um, but yeah, just as a heads up, this meeting is being like automatically recorded by Microsoft Teams. What that means is that I think pretty much the only thing it records is what I'm sharing, like visually, is what I'm sharing on my screen, and then it captures all of the audio. So if you unmute to like ask a question, your voice will be in the recording, but otherwise, you don't have to worry about your image or likeness being in this. Just wanted to give you guys a heads up, though. We usually post one of the workshops to our website after the fact, so that for people that couldn't make it to any of the four live while they were happening, they can, kind of scrub through and get the bits and pieces that they might want from it. So yeah, with that, I'll try to keep an eye on the um, people trying to check in so that we can let them in as they come. And then let's see. And yeah, okay, sorry about that. I'll try to keep an eye on that. I will also ask if you can hold your questions till there's like a break in slides or something like that. At least that'd be great. What we typically try to do is wait until the end to just kind of get through all the questions. But if you have one that pops into your head and you're worried that you might forget it by then, which is a thing that would definitely happen to me, feel free to throw it in the chat and I will answer it as soon as I can. And that way I can kind of take a look at it and maybe if I'm coming to that, like if I know an answer's coming up, I'll wait. And if not, I'll just take care of it then and there so that you have your answer. Um, yeah, so this is let's see, this program has been going on since 2009. This is I guess that makes this the 16th year of the program, I think, which is great. We've been doing it for a number of years. We now have a non-capital grant program as well. We also have a tax credit program at the county level, which is possibly of interest to many people who would be interested by this program. So I'll try to get, at least give you some information about that towards the end or as it's relevant in sort of comparing that program and this program, because they both kind of have different strengths and weaknesses in terms of helping to offset the cost of some of these capital projects that you might have on a historic property. So just really quickly, I want to go through what was in your registration packet. When you registered for this workshop, you should have received an email confirmation with the link to attend, and then these 5 attachments plus one additional attachment that is not pictured here because it's newer, and I just added it in for the last 2 workshops. So those attachments include the application instructions, which is basically what we're going to go through today just in a written form. So don't worry, too much about note taking today, because most of what I'm going to say, unless someone asks a very specific question that I answer, uh, most of what I say is going to be in these instructions in one form or another. Next is the application form itself, which is, fillable. This is what the application has to be submitted on. We can't like take Word documents or anything like that. So it should be our publications team put it together and has tested it, and it should work pretty well. So hopefully everybody can use that form. And if you have any trouble with it while you're applying, just let us know, and we can hopefully troubleshoot that. The next thing is these supplemental photo pages, which are similar to the application form, except that they are not mandatory. These are just for you to put in. We require, a number of photos to go along with the application showing the locations of where the grant-funded work would be done. And so you can use this PDF form to add those photos, hopefully in a way that is easy for you. But if it's easier to do it another way, you don't have to use that form. Next, we have the sample contract, which is just the boilerplate language of our grant and easement contract. So if you apply and are successful in receiving a grant award through this program, you will get this. this is basically the contract that you'll get with your specific information filled out. So the amount that you're getting and the type of work that was included in your application and all that good stuff. The final document shown here is this easement FAQ, frequently asked questions about the easement. That is part of the grant program. It's a requirement of the grant program. And I will not donate, I will dedicate a good amount of time to that at the end, just sort of explaining, what that is and how it works and the implications of that. And then the last thing that I included is this it's like a flow chart that kind of lays out the entire grant and easement process. It's color coded by section, and I'll bring that up in a couple of slides. But I figured it might be nice for you all to have like the full size version that you could follow along and because it is it's a really great program, but it is a long process, and there are many steps and kind of milestones that you have to get through before you can actually start doing the grant funded work. So I hope that that's will be a kind of useful roadmap for people um, moving forward. But so really quickly, the purpose of the grant program, which you all probably know at this point, is to protect, preserve, and enhance historic resources in Prince George's County. The individual grant limit this year is $50,000, and there is, I believe, a total available of 430. It's some not super round, 0 or 5 number like that. But so you can kind of imagine we do tell people the program's competitive, and if everybody's asking for 50, you get to that 400, you know, and change fairly quickly. So do keep that in mind as well. Um, so first, I want to go over eligibility. So in terms of what properties are eligible, you have these three main categories, which number one is designated county historic sites and resources, which are properties in Prince George's County, which are currently designated at the county level and therefore are subject to the county's historic preservation ordinance. They would have to get historic area work permits and things of that nature currently. Then we have properties that are individually listed on the National Register of Historic Places, which if a property meets that first criteria, it is, or if it meets the second criteria, it is almost certainly the first criteria as well. So, but you may have some that are just National Register and not locally designated. It's probably very unlikely. And then we also have this third category, which is contributing properties in local and national historic districts. So that includes any properties that are considered contributing resources within National Register districts in the county, which include places like the Hyattsville Historic District, um, Mount Rainier, let's see, there are a couple more, University Park. I'm thinking of all the ones that are close to Route 1. But there are many more, and those ones, they're these National Register historic districts, so they are, for the county's purposes, purely honorific, that, being in one of those districts does not inherently make you subject to the county's historic preservation laws. And so that's a slightly different category. And then if you're in a locally designated historic district, you probably are familiar with the program generally already, because that, again, the locally designated historic districts like Old Town College Park are ones that do they are subject to Subtitle 29 of the County Code, which is our preservation ordinance. So all that is to say that if you're one of these three categories, and if you're not sure, let me know. For the second and third one, we usually have to check with the state, but we can do that on our end fairly easily and quickly. So if you don't want to do that, just let us know, and we can pull up National Register inventory forms and check and see, if your property's street address is listed as contributing or not. So feel free to reach out if you have questions about that. In terms of who can apply, it's basically anyone in the county that is not a for-profit business, or, not the county government, not MNCPPC, and not the state government or federal government. So essentially, if you're, not anything larger than a municipal government or a for-profit company, and you have a eligible property, you can apply for this program. There is this one catch that if you've applied before and been successful in getting an award, you have to kind of skip 1 year in between. So somebody who received award in last year's cycle, which was fiscal year 2024, they may want to apply for another project or a phase two this year, but they would have to wait until FY26, which would be happening around this time next year. So just keep that in mind. Um, this slide is really important. This is, that grant contract boilerplate that you have in your workshop packet is basically just these 6 points written in, legal language. So this is the condensed version of that, and hopefully it'll make it a little easier to kind of just get an idea of what that contract entails. So point number one here is that the contract requires that you become designated as a Prince George's County Historic Site. So if the property that you are applying to get grant funds for is not currently a county historic site, that first eligible category on that other slide, then as part of this process, like once you get to the point of signing the grant and easement contract, you will have to agree to requesting that that property be evaluated and then designated as a county historic site. And so if it isn't one already, what that means is that you will be uh, making that property in the course of this, it will become subject to the preservation ordinance, which it wouldn't be currently. So that's a important thing to keep in mind. You would have this extra regulatory layer that would sort of come into play at the property. The second point is that all grant-funded work must comply with the Secretary of the Interior Standards for Rehabilitation. That is because those are the standards that the county's Historic Preservation Commission uses for reviewing work. And so we have to make sure that all of the grant-funded work also complies with those standards. We don't want to fund anything that wouldn't be approvable by the Historic Preservation Commission. The third is this required 10% match. So if you are to receive a grant award of, whatever amount it is, if it's up to the maximum of $50,000, your match would be $5,000 and so on and so forth. Point number four, again, is the donation of a perpetual historic preservation easement to MNC PPC. Again, this will come up multiple times in this presentation, but it's important to keep that in mind. That is another one of those milestones that will have to occur before you can actually start doing any grant-funded work. So it's kind of another very important step in the road. Number five, grant funds will only be issued as reimbursements for completed work. So what that is to say, you can't MNC PPC cannot, pay your contractors upfront directly, like sign a contract and pay them, and then they do the work. What happens is you go through all of these steps, the easement, the grant contract signing, and all that stuff, and then once all of these milestones have been completed, you can begin doing the work, and then as you get billed for the completed work, you can submit those invoices to MNC PPC for reimbursement. So that's basically, the short version of how it all works. And the sixth point is another one that we really like to hammer home. The grant awards may be taxable, and what we mean by that is that if you are successful in receiving a grant from MNC PPC, once you start doing the grant funded work, you will be like any year that you get a check from us, like a reimbursement check from MNC PPC, you will then, at the end of that year, when it's, tax season the following year, get a 1099 from MNC PPC reflecting those reimbursement payments. So what you want to do is just, kind of make sure if it's a concern of yours now, try to make sure that you, talk to your tax professional. We can't really give you much advice about that and how it would impact your taxes, but we know that it can. What we can do, if you are concerned about that and you do talk to a tax professional and they have questions about it, we're happy to connect with them and provide them with any kind of information about the program. It's ultimately all stuff that would be available on our website. So again, it's not like we're giving them any secret, information, but we're happy to kind of explain what the program is and the nature of it. And I think that there's usually, if they have that information, that can be helpful to figure out how to, have this impact you as little as possible. But just keep that in mind and also to clarify, you wouldn't start like having to worry about this taxability issue like the moment you sign the contract. It really is only after the completed work starts getting done. So if you sign the grant contract and, you know, time goes by and your situation changes and maybe you don't need the grant funds as much anymore, you can, just you would never have to worry about the award being taxable because it really will only happen once we've given you some of the money back, um, which I think is hopefully an important distinction. So in terms of the process, this is how the process works in terms of the timeline. And there's also, I have two kind of slides about this. The second one is that thing, the flow chart. Sorry about that. So this is the timeline. August 30th is when applications are due. We can't accept any new applications after August 30th. We will accept revisions to applications and additional information until September 13th. From September to October, the applications are collated and prepared for our grant committee. October and November, the applications will be reviewed by the grant committee in October and then by the Historic Preservation Commission in November. The grant committee and Historic Preservation Commission, they using the criteria that are included in the application instructions and which we'll go through in this presentation, they will score the applications out of 100 potential points, and they will they will make recommendations based on those scores, which will then be presented to the Historic Preservation Commission, which will then make its own recommendations to the planning board, hopefully sometime in January or February. And then after the planning board hears this information, they will make final decisions and determine who is receiving awards and how much. And then, you'll be notified of the result of your application, and at that point you will receive your grant contracts, and that's when that process of going through and signing and executing the contracts will take place. And then we're hoping that that will happen by be finished by no later than March. This timeline, it's maybe worth noting, is different from the last 7 or 8 years that we've been doing this. We bumped everything up by a couple months so that we would give ourselves way more room in between when the contracts go out to be signed and when the fiscal year end happens at the end of June. So now, this is all kind of in flux as we try to figure out the new timing for everything. Um, but anyway, all that is to say that we hope that that will happen and be wrapped up by March, but it has to be wrapped up by late May. So worst case scenario is it could go until late May, but I hope that it would not take that long. Then after the grant contracts are signed and executed, this is when you would go through all of these other processes, depending on the status of your property, of the subject property. So if the property that you're applying for grant funds for is already a historic site, this is when you would start going through the easement process. If you have been through the program before and your property is a county historic site and already has an easement from receiving previous funding through the program, this is when you would start just getting your historic area work permits in order and you'd be ready to go. And if your property is not a historic site and does not have the easement, you would start, you would request the evaluation and designation to become a historic site at the county level, and then you would also start on the easement process. And then when those are complete, you would get your work permits in order. So it really does depend on, the property and the sort of situation, how the timeline goes after March. But all of that is to say that grant funded work usually cannot begin until a year or more after the application period. So, hopefully next fall is when most people would be able to get started on work. But it can take longer depending on many things, and just also kind of factoring in the time that it sometimes takes the commission to do things and get things, routed through the commission. So just plan for that and make sure you communicate it to your contractors, and they might want to build that into their estimates so that like, hey, I'm asking for this estimate now, in August of 2024, but we wouldn't be doing this work until, maybe next fall. So, maybe they can kind of estimate like any increases, and hopefully that way you'll be, not too far off. And also you don't want to lose your contractors and have them wonder why the work hasn't started because you asked for an estimate and then all of this waiting happens. So we really really want to stress that. Um, so again, this is the other kind of way to visualize that process. It doesn't have the dates included on it, but it does kind of show you the steps in each one of these kind of key things that have to happen. So you've got this county designation, historic site designation process. Again, not everybody will have to go through this, but some of you may. So that's in orange. The easement process is in purple, and then the grant contract, which everybody will have to go through, is in blue. Um, and that's the shortest process. So, if you are in that situation, it's fairly simple. But if you have to do the historic site evaluation and the easement process, there are a lot of steps to that, and you can kind of see this in more detail if you look at the PDF that you received. If you didn't get that PDF, let me know. If you signed up for this workshop really early on, you may not have gotten it because it didn't exist until later. Um, but having said that, yeah, this just kind of gives you an idea. Hopefully it doesn't scare you away, but it is a fairly long and somewhat complicated process to get to the point of being able to do the grant funded work. And we do want to stress that and make people aware of it, but also like let you know that staff will be here to help you through this. So you're not just going to be handed this flow chart and told to figure it out or anything like that. We'll be around to kind of nudge and send things out and send out reminders and things like that. And hopefully make the process at least a little bit easier, if not less complicated. Um, so now, unless anybody has any questions, and I don't see any in the chat yet, I was just going to go through the application step by step so that you can kind of get a sense of a lot of it is very straightforward, and the questions are not difficult, but there are some towards the end where the way that you answer them and the way that you frame your answers can really impact the scoring that you get, which can then cumulatively kind of affect the odds of whether or not you get funding. So every point, kind of counts a little bit, and we want to try to help you get as many points as you can, based on your answers and the way that your information is presented, and so on and so forth. But to start with, we do ask for all of the applications this year to be submitted electronically via email. They can be submitted to this email address here, historicpreservation@ppd.mncppc.org, which oh, yeah, no, that is correct. Um, I'll put that up again at the end of the slideshow so you don't have to worry about jotting it down now. It is also included in the grant application instructions. So if you have that PDF, you'll have, you don't really need to worry about remembering that. We do ask that for every email that is sent that includes application materials that you use, you reference the Historic Property Grant Program in the subject line of the email, as well as the name of the historic site or resource. And if it does not have a name yet, you can just include the street address. And that way, we'll have on our end when we get them, Excel or not Excel, Outlook puts them all together, and so we'll just have a chunk of, all of the emails related to this property and all of the emails related to this property. And it makes it so much easier for us to keep track of everything that comes in. Because to the next point, a lot of the time you have to send multiple emails if all of your attachments won't fit on one, and that's fine. But just in the interest of not losing track of any of that stuff, we ask that you use that same subject line for all of your emails. And then also, please clearly label any attachments to the application. So, sometimes when you're scanning something, you just get this like Xerox and then a series of numbers and letters or something like that, which, looking at the file name, we have no idea what's supposed to be in there. So if you can just kind of give it a simple name like contractor estimate one, or, uh, required photos, or whatever it may be, that's really helpful for us to kind of very quickly do a visual check of what's there and what might need to still be submitted. And then we also ask that you kind of list the attachments in the body of that first email. So if you're going to have to send a second or third one, or what have you, just let us know what attachments you are intending to send, because I'm sure we've all experienced this where, you think that you've sent something, but maybe only one or two things went through instead of three or four. And because we have this second deadline where we allow folks to submit additional information, in between the first and second deadline, we might get your email and see three attachments and say, oh, okay, well, they're probably planning to send the other ones, later on. So we won't tell you, that they're missing. But if we know that you sent five attachments and we only got three, it becomes very easy for us to very quickly say, hey, we did not get these other two. Please resend them ASAP. And that way, we're not figuring this stuff out down to the wire, and running up against the deadline. So that helps it be hopefully a little bit easier on both the applicants and staff. Um, but yeah, that hopefully is not too annoying of a process. It sounds like a lot, but I think when you're actually doing it, it's not too bad. So the first question on the application is just the historic property name and address again. If you don't have a name, don't sweat it. You can just put the street address. And if you have one and maybe don't know what it is, we'll look it up. We will check every address that we get, and we'll make sure to note whether or not it is a historic site or resource or whatever the case may be. Uh, Next is the photographs that we require. So on the first page of the application, we ask you to just include one good representative image of the property. This field on the form, this dark gray rectangular field, you should be able to click on that and it should open a dialog box on your computer, which allows you to select a image file somewhere on your computer and upload that into the application form. And so hopefully that works. If it doesn't, let me know and we can figure out how to put that in. In the past, I've just sort of put it in at the end of the process. If people just send me the photo and we can work around that, because I know sometimes these PDF forms just don't do what they're supposed to. But having said that, again, we want this to be a representative image. We don't want to just see an image of a old busted window, like close-up detail in this space. But what we do ask is that after we get this representative image, that you include up to 6 pages of additional images that are clear and, very easy to see and detailed, good quality, and then that those will be where you show like the areas of deterioration or, what have you, like crack in the foundation, weathered looking roof tiles and that sort of thing, so that we'll know, this is what I would like to spend the grant money on, kind of thing. And you can use those supplemental photo pages that I mentioned before, to do this, because those will have these same kind of clickable fields on them, and you can upload photos directly into the form, and then you can also do this required labeling and dating of each image. So you can say, this is the first floor southeast window, or whatever it is, so just so that we can orient ourselves, because sometimes with those detailed photographs it's very difficult to get a sense of where they were taken if you're not familiar with the property. um, but again, if it's easier to just drop them all into a Word document or something like that, that's also fine. It's really, for the required photos, we want you to do whatever is easiest for you, because we know it can be kind of a process to do that. The next field is the amount of funding requested, which is up to $50,000. So we ask you to please not put more than that in here. Even if the amount of work for the total project is more than that, this should not be more than 50. Um, then we have the applicant contact information. This is just the person who we will be, corresponding with regarding the application if there's an issue, if something's missing, if we have feedback. So this person should be pretty readily contactable, have access to their email regularly, and things like that. It does not necessarily have to be the property owner. It often is, but certainly it can be someone else if that makes more sense. Um, Next, we ask for a brief project description, and it's always a little bit difficult to kind of give guidance on how to fill this out, but basically, the way that I try to explain it is that we want a succinct description here. We kind of want it to have enough detail to know what you're planning to do with the grant money, obviously, but we don't need the kind of fine grained detail here. So, for example, if you were going to have your historic windows rehabilitated, you could just sort of say in the brief project description, I'm going to have 8 historic double hung wood windows restored to their original condition, and then we're going to add storm windows on top of them. And there you go. And then where we will get the other details, because we do want to know the specifics of how the work will be completed, we just don't want to clutter up this one space with that. So where that information usually comes into play is next in the, oops, sorry. Thought I would advance this slide here in the project budget, because we do ask that for every line item in the budget, you have an associated contractor estimate or proposal that goes along with it. So, and in that proposal, that's where we would hope to see, Steve Smith LLC is going to be doing the window repair, and they've quoted it at this much, and they're going to, they are planning to take 8 windows, remove them from the property, take them to their shop, remove the paint via steam box or infrared heat or whatever the case may be, check the wood for carpentry repairs as needed, and all of that stuff. And that's where we would get that detail. So don't worry about trying to cram all that into number 5, because a lot of people want to do that because they want us and the grant reviewers to see like we're doing this work the right way. And that is important, but it becomes difficult sometimes to fit all of that information there. So for the sake of kind of having the applications all be consistent, we just ask for it to be pretty brief in that section. And then in the budget, again, we would get more of that information here. Very quickly, just to kind of go through the budget, the first column is grant, which means that anything in that column is what you would actually be asking for MNC PPC to fund specifically. So it may just be part of the overall project cost. Then there's the total cost, and that's everything going across from left to right, including what the grant would be paying for and your match that is required. And that your match can be that'll be in this one of these 3 columns or all of them. It's generally cash, but it can also be in kind or donated materials. For donated, that can be something like, maybe you have someone repainting the exterior of your property, and the contractor that's doing the painting says that they're estimating that it's going to take, I don't know, 12 gallons of paint, and they make it a baker's dozen and give you an extra gallon of paint for free, and maybe that's worth $50 and it's donated, so we just need to make sure we have documentation of that. So in that case, like that example, uh, you would want to have the painter or whoever it is doing the work kind of give you something that says, this is how much we charge per gallon. Therefore, we're not charging you for this, and that's what the donation is, and that's how you kind of get a tangible value to that. In terms of in-kind work, that can be, maybe you're scraping some of the paint off of the house, or doing something like that. We've had people in the past that have, kind of installed, like they get through the window rehabilitation process and then they install the storm windows themselves because it's fairly simple after, the really professional people do the really hard work, and that we give them, I think it's either 15 or $20 an hour for in-kind labor. They document how much work they did, or on the other hand, what the most recent people have done is they, again, the contractor that would have otherwise been installing those storm windows has that broken out in the quote. It would have cost an additional $1,200 or whatever the case may be. So we count that as an in-kind labor contribution of $1,200. So, all of that is to say, if it's not cash, if it is cash, it has to be documented, obviously. But usually the cash matches are easier to document. So for the other two, as long as there's some clear documentation of it, it doesn't all have to be cash, is the short version of that long spiel. So this again is a sample budget, just to sort of make it clear how it's supposed to come together, is that the items should total across going left to right in each row, and then top to bottom in each column. The application form should do the math for you, but we will check it, so don't worry about that. And if we notice that anything is incorrect, we will, we'll let you know, and you'll have the opportunity to fix it, and we won't, just leave it like that and leave you guys hanging. Because I have been betrayed by the calculation tables in Excel before, so I will never fully trust that the table will do it right. Um, so next I wanted to quickly go through the criteria that each of these applications will be scored on. Again, it's worth a total of 100 points. This is the first 40. And for a lot of the ones in this category, they're not worth a ton, that's 5 to 10. The next kind of chunk of criteria are the ones that are worth more points, 15 and 10 typically. So for these, if they have a little red number next to them, like the first two here, that number refers to the number of the question in the application form where you will address this criterion. So for number 7, the historical and cultural significance of the resource, fairly straightforward. Um, you know, this is the kind of thing that if the property is already a historic site or resource, designated at the county level, we'll have a kind of pre-made blurb that you can just copy and paste and put right in there, rather than having to recreate the wheel. If it's a contributing property in a national or local historic district, we can pretty much usually do a similar thing where we give you the significance of the district itself, and then you can kind of say, and this property, just sort of brief correction. If you're not a historic site, if you're in that kind of you know, category of being kind of out there on your own, you might have to do a little bit of research or give us something. But generally speaking, we'll be able to help you with this one, and fill it in. For number 8, the urgency of need for financial assistance. This is where we're trying to really get the sense of, is there some special, like, is this moment in time that if you can secure this funding, maybe you have a grant coming from the state or some other source, and if you get this one, you can use this one as matching funds for that one, and that one can be the matching funds for this one, and you can really get a lot of work done that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do. And something like that is kind of a good answer to this question. What we don't want in this answer, and I say this because it kind of sounds like this is what we're asking here, is we aren't, the planning board is not allowed to take anyone's kind of individual financial situation into account when considering these applications. So it's not the kind of thing where what we mean by need for financial assistance is you saying, I don't have any money, so I need the money, And obviously if you're applying to the program, it's kind of implied that you could use the help. So try to focus on, something else for this question if you have it. The next couple of criteria are these ones with the sort of tan background. These are ones that are inherent to the property, so you don't have to worry about addressing them. They just kind of are what they are based on, where the property is and what type of building it is and all of that stuff. So, they don't count as a ton for a ton of points, but they're there, and you can kind of just be aware of them. The first one is historical and cultural diversity. This is where we're looking at, when you look at the historical and cultural significance of the resource, like is it unique among the pool of applicants for a given year? So again, it's only worth 0 to 5 points, and it's not going to make or break your application, but it really does depend on just who else applies at the same time as you, because you could all have a very similar, significant statement for your property, but maybe someone has a slightly different one and they'll get 5 points, and maybe the ones that are all similar will get 1 or 2 points. So that's kind of how that works. The diversity of resource types is very similar. So instead of looking at the significance, we're looking at the actual form and type of architecture for the subject property. If we have every application is for some Queen Anne house or something, they're all going to get, probably 1 point. And but maybe there's one building that really sticks out as being architecturally different, or is a public building, or a church or something like that, as opposed to a residence. And so those little differences in the type of building it is, as well as the architecture style, those that it's again not very many points, but a lot of little things factor into it. The next one and the one after that, so the next two is probably the succinct way to say that. That's the two that are related to the geography of where the subject property is. So this is where we look at the equitable countywide distribution of grant funds, as well as whether or not the property is located within one of these sustainable communities areas. This is the map from a few years ago, and you can see that there is a very high concentration of applications that were received from the north part of the county in that sort of Route 1, Anacostia Trails Heritage area, uh, uh, you know, Nexus, whatever that is. And so many that we had to do a little bump out map to show them all in a legible way. And so what that meant for these applicants is that out of the 10 points, they got like 2 points, or, as little as we could give them. Whereas, this guy down here got 10 points, and this little pink guy over here also got 10 points, because they're just in their own little worlds. There's no one else down there, and we want to kind of give them a little bit of an edge, so that there's a better chance that the money will be spread out throughout the county. It's done by council manic district, so whatever council person's district you're in will be how we base that on. So again, the ones that are clustered together, if they're all in the same council manic district, that's what really ultimately matters. And the way that it kind of typically shakes out is if you have one property in a council manic district, they get the full 10 points. If there are two properties, it goes down to 8 points for each one. Three gets six, and so on and so forth. It's pretty formulaic, and it's not really something that's left up to the discretion of the reviewers. This is also like that. The sustainable communities, these kind of purple blobs on the county map here, show you where these sustainable communities are located. And there's a list of them here too. I believe we have this on the planning department website somewhere, but I can certainly provide it to you from here if you would like. But we'll, again, when we get the application, we will plug that address into PG Atlas. We'll turn on the sustainable communities layer, and if the property is located within one of the sustainable communities areas, you'll get that extra 5 points. And if it's not, you won't. So it's just a way to kind of try to promote, economic investment in these areas, and kind of, putting our money where our mouth is by saying it's a program of the Maryland Department of Planning, but the county departments of planning work with them to kind of determine where these communities will be, and work with the communities that want to be part of this. And then, the idea is to help really fund rehabilitation and investment in these areas, and because they might have good access to transit, or, other things like that. So we trying to give them a little bit of an edge is the intent of that criterion. Next we get back to these questions that you can actually answer. And again, these are the ones that are generally worth most of the points, in terms of a per criterion answers. Number 9 is we are asking you to describe the retention of historically significant material or details in your project. Sometimes this is very obvious, like with my prior window example. If you're having your original wood windows fully restored to be, perfectly operable, and, well insulated and all this stuff, that's great, because you're not, proposing to remove the historic windows. But what I want to stress here, and the purpose of talking about it in this workshop, is that, pretty much anything that we can fund through this program, any work that's eligible, should have some element of both 9 and 10 in it. The retention of historically significant material, and then the provision for long-term resource preservation. So the key is to really find where that's coming from, and stress that in your written answer to the application. and just kind of make it as compelling as you can. Put a little spin on it, I guess is one way to put it. But it, obviously in a truthful way. So if you were replacing the roof on a residence, and you're replacing a 35-year-old asphalt shingle roof, it's a little bit past its lifetime. It's not in and of itself inherently historic in any way, but what you are doing is keeping a functioning roof on the property, which then contributes to the retention of all the other historically significant material and details that are included in that property. So there's always some element of that. And the same goes for number 10. It may be that certain projects just it's really apparent, but other ones that we might fund, sometimes we fund HVAC related work because that can be really good for the long term. I mean, it's an important element of long-term resource preservation in many cases, controlling the interior humidity, preventing mold and other kinds of, moisture related damage. So just, if it's not something that really jumps out as obvious, try to find what it is and just really beat it over the head loudly in your application because that will help. You may get slightly more points by doing that, and every little point adds up, and it could make the difference between, someone who gets 75 points is where the money runs out that year, and so anyway. Um, Number 11 is the extent to which the project could stimulate or promote other preservation activities. This one is not worth as many points because it's not as easy of a thing to really quantify, or, uh, you know, sometimes it's hard to have an answer for this at all. Generally speaking, unless you have something else specific for your project, I usually say that the kind of general idea is that, when you're doing this grant funded work, maybe a neighbor or someone in the community will notice, and they'll say, "Hey, that's interesting." And you can talk to them and mention the grant program or mention, just the historic preservation program in the county generally, and then they will become aware of it, and perhaps they will choose to participate in it as well, or perhaps they're already a historic site that aren't aware of these, financial incentives. So that's the kind of thing that we're hoping will at least sometimes happen, but we know that it's a little bit hard to guarantee that or speak to that. So um, don't stress too much about it. But if you need a kind of canned response, that's usually what I tell people to go with. The next one is the readiness to initiate and complete the project. This is going to be shown by various things in your application, but we'll also ask you about it. So you can speak to this. Maybe you'll say, "Hey, look, I've got these contractors. They know that the work's not going to be able to start for 12 to 18 months. Uh, I know what my match stuff is going to be. Like I have this stuff lined up. Little things like that will tell us that you are ready to initiate and complete the project. Similarly, the next one, administrative capability. You can obviously talk about maybe you have experience managing capital projects or managing grants or whatever the case may be, and that's great if you have that kind of very specific, relevant administrative experience that relates to this. But for everybody else, we're going to be looking at things like, how well put together your application is. Like if it's easy to follow your application and it's well organized and the answers are clear and concise and, all of that good stuff, that helps your administrative capability score. Because it just sort of shows us that, like, hey, they're managing the process of doing the application well, so that kind of bodes well for their ability to manage moving forward. And then the last one is the demonstrated community interest and support. This is only worth 5 points again as well. And we ask you to get up to 5 letters of support from people in your community to demonstrate support for the project. A lot of people get this from their elected officials. So, whether that's your county council member, or if you're in a municipality, maybe it's someone on the municipal council or your mayor. But it can also be neighbors and other members of the community. Um, it can be really great to sometimes hear from those folks instead, because you might get a more kind of specific letter. A lot of the ones that come from elected officials are very kind of template based where it's just like, yeah, I think it's great. I support historic preservation and I appreciate that this property owner is, doing this and that's great. And it's again, it's not a huge deal, but um, see what you can get and we'll go from there. Let's see. And then this is the last chunk of the application is the property owner and or organizational certification. Really quickly, this is where, if the property owner is not the applicant themselves, this is where we'll want the property owner's name and contact information as well. The property owner is the person that will eventually have to sign the grant and easement contract as well as the easement itself. So this is our way of knowing that, especially if they're not the applicant, that they are uh, they're okay with this. They know that this grant is being applied for, and they are willing to go along with all of the requirements that are involved in receiving the grant. And I'm gonna take a sip of water and then just read this very briefly because I know it's small. But basically, what this fine print says is that you're going to complete this to the best understanding of how it should be completed. I know that someone is, filling out this application for my property that I own. Uh, I agree to the conditions and procedures outlined in the application instructions, the grant contract, the program guidelines, and then I'm aware of the requirements related to timing and specifications, historic site designation, and the easement, and all of this stuff. And that's what you're that's what you're agreeing to here is that you understand all of these things. And so um, if you have any questions about them while you're filling out the application, feel free to reach out so that you can feel like you understand them. There's a spot for a second property owner if that is relevant. And then there's also an area for a corporate resolution. So if you're from a municipality that's applying for this grant or from some other type of organization, maybe a nonprofit or a church congregation, you would skip 15 and go straight to 16, the corporate resolution. And then just make sure that whoever signs this on behalf of your organization is someone who's authorized to do so, which probably sounds like a very silly thing to say, but at a certain point, again, this person will have to sign these legal documents, and our legal staff are going to be very dogged, I guess, about finding some sort of documentation that the person who is saying they can sign these things is actually authorized to do that. So that's when this becomes really important. We're not gonna, I'm not gonna know who is allowed to do this when I get the application, but eventually it will become fairly important. So try to identify that person now, and then this is again our way of knowing that when that person eventually gets this contract slid in front of them on their desk or the easement, they're going to be familiar with what it is and not be kind of surprised and confused. Really quickly, I have these kind of before and after photos here of other properties that have been through the program. They're fairly, you can see these dramatic results. I guess I probably don't need to say too much about them. Um, but here they are, just so you can kind of get a sense of what you can do through this program. Many of these program are well, this one isn't one of these cases, but I was going to say many of these properties have been through the program more than once. So you get your initial grant, and then maybe you come back again for phase two or for some different part of another rehabilitation project. And over time, you can do quite a bit of work using this program. This one was a one and done, but for this one, the Claggett House at Cool Spring Manor, this is a great example of a property that basically everything was rehabilitated on this or restored in some cases. You can see the doorway here was moved from being slightly off center back to its center hall, original location. This was based on documentary photographs and evidence, and that's an important point too. We do most of the work that we fund is preservation and rehabilitation related, but we can also fund work items that are more related to this sort of reconstruction of lost features or things like that. But we always want to make sure that they are not conjectural. So in this case, like they would not have received grant funding to move the door if there were not evidence to show that the door were in this other location. Um, so that's something to keep in mind too. So like that can really affect the eligibility of a part of your project if it kind of comes down to that. And I'm trying to think, in recent years we've seen that in the form of, maybe you have a single family home and your porch supports have been replaced with sort of plain iron or plain wood, and there are other houses that are very similar in your neighborhood, similar age, similar style, and maybe they have some nice turned wood columns or something like that. So you have some idea that like, oh, okay, this is probably what was originally there, and I'd like to restore that appearance. As long as there's some kind of evidence for that, we could probably fund that as well. But it's just really critical that we get that evidence. So next, I'm going to take another large sip of water here and get into the easement. Oh, actually, I see something in the chat. So let me see that. Oh, okay. Is there a certain type of siding that would qualify as historically significant material? That's a great question. Um, yes. Basically, anything that's there now that is not synthetic, we would probably, any wood siding that exists is generally considered historic. The flip side of that is that if all of the original wood siding is gone and maybe you now have asbestos shingles or something like that, we wouldn't, make you rehabilitate those. We would certainly allow for the removal and, qualified disposal of such things. Um, what we would love to see would be the replacement of that type of later synthetic siding with a wood siding product. But in some cases, if you have aluminum siding now and there's nothing original left, you could potentially get funding to do something like a hardy board, just that improves the appearance and brings it back to something closer to what would have been there. The Historic Preservation Commission has a policy against, approving synthetic materials like vinyl and things like that. So we wouldn't be able to fund anything that involved the repair or replacement of those type of things. What we do see a lot of in this program, or not a lot, but the most typical thing related to siding specifically is that you might have a house that has aluminum siding visible or asbestos siding or whatever it may be, but you can kind of peel it back a little bit and see that the original wood siding is underneath. And we've funded, a decent number of projects like that where the project is to remove all of the later synthetic siding that looks really beat up and old at this point, and then, go through and just rehabilitate the wood siding that's underneath. You replace it in kind if there are parts of it that are too rotted to be repaired, and that's that type of project does really well, I would say, in these grant application cycles, because it is an expensive undertaking, and so it's the perfect thing to say, oh, this is really expensive, and otherwise I probably wouldn't do it. But with the grant funding, it maybe makes more financial sense, and we end up with this really nice looking product that is more historically accurate. Um, okay, so hopefully that answers that question a little bit. But so I'm going to go through the easement now again. You're probably most familiar with the concept of an easement, like through utilities and stuff like that. If you own a home or other property, there's usually some type of utility easement that allows the power company or the gas company or the water company to, enter, step on your property to read the meter or access utility lines that run through a portion of your property and things like that. Ours are different, but it's the same basic legal kind of framework, which is that it is in the form of this easement document that gets recorded in the land records, that contains information on what legal rights you are giving to someone else. So, you have a kind of this idea of the bundle of property rights, and you're giving some of those sticks from that bundle of property rights to MNCPPC in this case. Um, we're not actually going to be using your land. This is the sort of generic definition. In our case, it is that we would have, you would be legally binded to protect the history and character of the property and the way that that would happen. would be through this easement with MNCPPC, where we then have the authority to, in addition to the regular historic site uh, regulatory process, the easement committee, which is a part of MNCPPC rather than the Historic Preservation Commission, which is a part of the county, will also get to review any exterior changes and things like that. So it kind of adds a second layer of almost identical protection that the subtitle does. Um, and yeah, that's basically what it is, which probably is not any less confusing. But I'll go through why we do it, and maybe hopefully this stuff will help a little bit. So the basic reason is that, we want to protect the investment of this public money that comes from, the taxpayers in the county. We would hate to see somebody, throw $50,000 behind doing some really great rehabilitation work on a historic resource, and then maybe they have to sell the property a year or two later, and the new owners just come in and tear it all out and, do whatever. That would be a real shame. And so we want to take seriously our uh, protection of those public funds and what they are used to accomplish. Um, and I mentioned before that generally the restrictions imposed by the easement are very similar to those that would already be in effect for county historic sites. And of course, if you're going through the program, by the point you're getting to the easement, you will already be a county historic site if you aren't one now. And what that means is, as part of the historic site designation, you are again subject to Subtitle 29 of the Prince George's County Code, which is our historic preservation ordinance. And the basic thing of that ordinance is that if you're one of these designated historic sites or resources, in addition to all of the regular building permits that you would maybe need to get for certain projects, there are any projects that affect the exterior appearance or materials of the historic site or resource, and any changes to the environmental setting, which is usually the parcel that it is located on, new construction, additions, removal of other outbuildings or other structures. All of those types of work would have to go through this historic area work permit process, where you fill out a form and say, this is what I am proposing to do. And it goes via the planning department to the Historic Preservation Commission, which again is part of the county government. And they will either approve or deny those permits. So what the easement does is it kind of duplicates that process, but it's through MNCPPC rather than through the county. So, when you submit your historic area work permit application, it comes again to the planning department, and then we will route it to the Maryland National Capital Planning Commission's easement committee, where they will review the work and make a decision on whether or not they wish to approve it. And then it also goes to the HPC. They're 99% of the time going to be in complete agreement with each other because they're both using the Secretary of the Interior standards. Depending on you know, there may be some minor thing in the easement, and it's probably not even worth mentioning because this is a very rare thing, but every once in a while there might be something a little more strict in the easement that, so maybe the easement committee is going to be a little bit stricter, but generally speaking, it's kind of a one-to-one in terms of those restrictions. So if you're already a historic site, it's not going to make a ton of difference for you. If you're not, you will be inviting this additional regulatory oversight into the property as part of the process. And the reason we do it, even though it's kind of duplicative to the subtitle's protections, is that the subtitle is legislation. It is passed by the county council, and there could be a future composition of the county council that decides they want to change or remove, get rid of it entirely. Maybe they weaken it. There's no longer maybe it becomes an honorific thing. And so in those cases, we would again sort of just lose our ability to protect these public investments. So the easement guarantees that the funding and the benefit from the funding is continues to be protected, even if something were to change with the county's legislation, because it's a private agreement between MNCPPC and the property owner and subsequent property owners. It will still be there even if Subtitle 29 is fully removed. And that's an important distinction to keep in mind. Um, Another very basic answer to this question, why and why they're perpetual, is that the Maryland land use article that enables MNC PPC to have these capital grant programs, both in Montgomery and Prince George's County, very, very clearly requires that we do this, that we take a perpetual easement on the property, and it specifies that it has to be perpetual. So we, you know, that is also kind of on a very basic level why we do it, because we have to for the program to exist. And that's why let's see. Well, I'll go through this really quickly, but one of the things that can be kind of hairy with an easement is, even if you as the property owner are totally fine with it, if you have a mortgage on your property, we have to get the mortgage holder to subordinate their mortgage to the easement. And what that means is, like, if you think about the title to a property, if it were like a physical thing, and every encumbrance on that title is kind of a domino in a row. Uh, whichever one is recorded first, if that one falls down, all of the ones behind it go with it, kind of thing. So if there's this deed of trust that secures a mortgage on the property, and that deed of trust is ever foreclosed on, it would effectively nullify our easement, which is after it. So, and as I mentioned before, the state law requires our easements to be perpetual. So in order for them to be perpetual, we have to make sure that our easement is in the front of that row of dominoes, so that it can't be kind of knocked out by some unrelated process. And so that's important to keep in mind. Most lenders usually do come around to it, but it can take a while. Sometimes it just takes a while to like find an actual person, like, within the institution who can review this stuff and make decisions, and isn't just a kind of customer service representative. So that might be something you want to start working on now as well, looking into the tax implications, and then also, if you have a mortgage, talking to the person that holds the note and just sort of seeing, maybe getting the ball rolling on that, gauging how willing they are to consider it, and things like that. Because if they ultimately, if a lender refused, then you really wouldn't be able to move forward with the grant. And that hasn't happened a ton before. I think once, when it was close to happening, the property owner refinanced and changed lenders, and they found a lender that was willing to do it. And, that's obviously a lot of extra work. So, yeah, it's not a terrible idea to kind of run this by them. Now, we also need to make sure if there are any liens or other title encumbrances, those have to be resolved before the easement can be recorded for the same reasons. And those are handled in a slightly different way. Liens would have to be, uh, you know, resolved with the IRS or whatever organization has put the lien on the property. Um, but anyway, all that is to say that, what does the easement do? Again, it obligates the property owner and subsequent owners to refrain from certain actions and seek approval from the commission for other actions. So, any changes to the exterior. It doesn't constitute any ownership interest in the property by MNC PPC. It is required as a condition of this grant program, and it does require MNC PPC via the planning department staff to routinely monitor the property to ensure adherence with the terms of the easement. The way we do that is via annual inspection, which may sound a little invasive, but it really comes down to us sending, an email or a letter that says, "Hi, we're the staff of the preservation section, and we need to do this regular easement inspection, and we would like to do it on this date, between 9 and 12 p.m. or whatever it is. And, if that doesn't work for you, let us know and we'll reschedule it." And most of the time, you know, we don't even necessarily need you to be there to meet with us unless you want to do that. So it's not the kind of thing where you're going to be expected to like meet with us for 2 hours and sit down and have us grill you annually. It's much more. It can be fairly uninvolved from your end if you want it to be. Um, And then part of that process, doing the easement inspections, is that we like to think that we can give you, as the property owner, some technical assistance. You'll have a second set of eyes, kind of on your property, and we might notice things that because you're there every day, like maybe we'll see something that you don't see a little bit sooner, and you can correct a problem before it becomes larger and more expensive. That's kind of our ideal version of how this works is us being collaborators with you in the preservation of this property and not like an adversarial relationship, which is, I think, what many people may have as a idea of how this works. Um, so very quickly, key points to remember. Applications are due by August 30th. You can then add additional information or change things. Maybe you find a better contractor that you like, so you swap out the contractor estimates and adjust your budget. Things like that can happen until September 13th. Obviously, the earlier you can get applications in, if we get them all on August 30th, then we're we're going to have to just review them all very quickly to get feedback back to you in time for you to make changes by the 13th of September. So the earlier we get them, the more we can kind of review them on a rolling basis and give you feedback and be less under a time crunch. The program is competitive, funding is not guaranteed, which is important to remember. That's another area where the tax credit differs because if the work is eligible, and the property is eligible, the tax credit is fairly guaranteed. So I can talk about that more in a minute if we have time at the end of this. Grant funded work can't be initiated until these various milestones are met. So we have to get through the historic preservation or the historic preservation easement process. We also have to go through the contracting process, and we also have to make sure that the property is a county historic site. So once all of those three things have happened, some of which may have already happened before you apply, uh, you can't start doing the grant funded work before that because anything that happens before all three of those milestones have been completed can't be reimbursed. The program is reimbursement based, so after you've met those milestones, you have to start doing the work, pay the contractor, and then you'll get reimbursed from the commission for that work as it's completed. And then again, MNC will issue this 1099 for any reimbursement payments that you get from us. So please, please, please consult a tax professional if you're concerned about that, just so that you know how it may affect you and, you're not surprised by it later on, because that's not what we want to have happen. So I'm going to put up my contact information here, and I see we have another question in the chat. Must the contractor be licensed and bonded? Yes, we do require that the contractors be licensed and bonded. Um, but it doesn't have to be necessarily anyone that's like a historic preservation specialist. So really any contractor that can do the work in the way that it would need to be done to meet the Secretary of the Interior standards is fine. And if they're not sure about that, we can always talk with them and provide them with the National Park Service issues these preservation briefs and bulletins that lay out, different ways that certain work can be done on properties that does meet the Secretary of the Interior standards, and they can use those as a guide. Um, and then, do we have a list of preferred contractors? We do, and I don't know. Let me try to pull it up. Our website was recently changed by someone that is not me, and it used to be very easy to find our list of they're not necessarily contractors that we recommend because we don't want to, say you should do business with anyone in particular, but we had this list of, we called it preservation professionals, and it's basically people who we know do this type of work, and it's broken down by specialties. So you have window rehabilitation people, and I just don't know where that exists on our website anymore. But let me see, national numbers. I'll try to keep looking for that while I go back into the chat to see if there are any more questions, because we also have there's an organization that we are a member of, which is it's MAHDC, which is the Maryland Association of Historic District Commissions, and I know that in the past they have had a contractor directory as well, and I can actually find theirs. So anyone that's in their directory that does work in Prince George's County would also be fine. So I'll put that in the chat for now. Um, and hopefully I can find the other one and send it to you if I don't find it in time to put it in the chat here. So I would pay out of pocket for the completed work and then get reimbursed. Is that correct? Yes. The one distinction is like you don't necessarily have to pay for all of it. So if you have like a $50,000 project, we're not expecting you to necessarily have all of that $50,000 tied up waiting for reimbursement. You can do that, like whatever works best for you. But if you're in a situation where the contractor is like, willing or able to bill you in little chunks, maybe they charge you, $2,000 to start work, and then you pay a chunk in the middle, and then you pay the last chunk when the work is completed. You can submit those, you know, proof of payment for those chunks of work and get reimbursed on a kind of, rolling basis like that as well, so that you don't have quite as much money tied up all at once. But again, it's literally whatever is easier. If it's easier for bookkeeping purposes to just do it all in one thing, that's great too. Um, Contractors ask for an initial deposit after being paid. Can this be reimbursed? This is a very good question. I don't have a firm answer. I would say that we can always ask. We can always check with our legal department. If you are in this situation, shoot us an email before you pay them the deposit, and we can check because sometimes we have been able to, for various reasons, get our legal department to say, yes, you can do this specific thing and it will be reimbursable, even though the contract says that, anything that happens before the day of the easement and everything. So we can probably work around that in cases like that where it's necessary. Another thing is, depending on the size of the deposit, that might end up being something that you can just kind of plan to use as your match. Um, but obviously, if it's larger than the 10%, you're not going to want to lose the ability to get reimbursed for that. So I would just say definitely reach out to us when we get to that point, and we will communicate with our legal staff and try to get some permission for you in writing to get, to accrue that expense, even if it's before the date of the easement being recorded or whatever might be the last thing. How long does it take for MNC PPC for reimbursements? This is a great question. They tell us to tell folks that it will be about 30 days. And sometimes it's quicker than that. Oftentimes it is a little bit longer than that. 30 days is a great kind of ideal timing because if you're in a position of like, maybe you're putting $2,000 or $3,000 on your credit card and then trying to get reimbursed before the interest hits, that's obviously great. They go quicker if they're really, really easy to follow, and sometimes like the receipts and billing stuff that contractors give are just really not easy for our finance people to follow, and we will get them sent back. We'll look at them and say this looks great, and then they'll send them back and say, well, actually, we'd like to see images of the checks that were used, or bank statements, or credit card statements, or whatever the case may be. They have admittedly kind of tightened up how much they want to see in terms of proof of payment. But if we have everything, then I would say the 30 days is usually pretty good. Usually where it gets slower is if they, in the process of the reimbursement request winding its way through the commission, it lands on someone's desk and they say, this, no, we need more documentation, or this doesn't make sense. And then we would come back to you and ask for additional stuff, and that can slow the process down. But um, you know, sometimes that happens, but we will try to work with you. Obviously, if we get a reimbursement request, the historic preservation section is the first part of the commission to get it. If we notice anything that's obviously missing, we'll let you know right away so that you can get it to us and we don't have to wait for it to get kind of stuck in a jam later on. But sometimes we are surprised by those things as well. And, we'll think that something looks perfectly reasonable and assembled in the way that it needs to be, and then we'll get it kicked back, weeks later. Um, so, just I guess I would say be prepared for it to be a little bit longer than 30 days sometimes, but that is the goal. Um, Can the funds be used for employed supervision? Uh, I'm not sure I understand what you mean by that. But possibly, if you can elaborate, I might be able to give you a better answer. Um, but yeah, I'm trying to think of, sorry if I'm totally, maybe that's a thing that I should very easily understand, but it could be, this is like the fourth or fifth workshop we've done, so maybe I'll wait and see what you have to say, and I'll try to look for that contractor directory in the meantime again, really quick. Let's see. Okay, well, I'm still not having much luck with that. Oh, a supervisor for the oh yeah, so like if you had we have had folks that they might have an architect overseeing multiple phases or multiple things happening at once, like maybe windows and siding and all that stuff. And that's generally okay. We can't, that's a bad example for me to give because we can't pay for like architecture fees necessarily. So if you're hiring an architect and they're doing drawings, we wouldn't be able to fund that through this program. But if they're kind of functioning as a or you have like a general contractor that's overseeing a couple of subcontractors, then that's typically okay. You wouldn't want that to be the majority of the budget. Like I think the planning board, like the spirit of the program is to really be funding the work. But obviously, if that's a necessary part of the work, then it's most likely fundable. And I would also say uh, the way that it's presented might make a difference as well, because sometimes that's broken out and it looks like it's a separate expense, and it looks like, oh, you're. But if it's included in like the invoice and it's just sort of part of the cost of doing business, that's maybe a little bit easier to justify, than having it be on a separate invoice or as a separate line item or something like that. That might raise a red flag at some point, you know, up the chain, and we might again get slowed down and have to kind of explain why it's okay. So, I would say maybe keep that in mind as well. And because I think a lot of the time it is just sort of baked into the overall cost that when they're giving you an estimate or whatever. Um, so yeah, I don't have a ton else to say. So if I don't see any more questions, I can really quickly give a brief overview of the tax credit program, which may be again relevant to some of you. I noted before that the grant program is not guaranteed. It's competitive and all this stuff. And you've gotten some sense now of how long it can take to actually get to the point of being able to do the grant funded work. Um, so one of the great things about the tax credit program is that it kind of does not have either of those two issues. For the tax credit program, if you're a historic site or resource, you would do the work, and obviously, if any of the work is exterior or structural, you would get your historic area work permit and then do the work. But once the work is completed and paid for, you have up to 5 years to just submit this application, and it's a very simple one-page application. You submit that along with your, proof of completed work, photos of the completed work, and then documentation of payment. And then that is received by the Historic Preservation Section, presented to the HPC. They approve it, and then the County Office of Finance will issue a tax credit in the amount of 25% of whatever the eligible uh, expenses were. So if you were to spend, $1,000 on something, I don't know, maybe 10,000 is a better number because nothing is $1,000 anymore. You would then get this $2,500 tax credit. And the way that that works is so the following county tax year, so if the work is done between July 1st and June 30th, you would get it for the following tax year, it begins to apply to the county line of your property tax bill. So if you might have a municipal line, you might have the state, the county, whatever it is, but it is only applied to the county portion. And depending on the size of the credit, if it's large and you don't utilize it all in 1 year, it can be used for up to 10 years until all of the credit is utilized. So if you were to end up with I don't know, let's say you get a $25,000 credit because you do $100,000 worth of work, and then maybe your property tax bill is only the county portion is 3,000 a year. You would have several years where your county property taxes would essentially be nullified. So that's how that works. It's not as direct. You don't just get the work done and then apply for reimbursement, but it is guaranteed and it is much better for urgent work. Like if you have a roof that's leaking today, and you have to get that replaced or whatever it is, then the grant program is really not great for that because because you can't do the work now. You just have to keep a bucket under that leak until you've gone through this whole process. And the tax credit can be, a better way to still recoup some of that cost while not having to wait through this process. There's also no easement associated with the tax credit. But you do have to be a historic site or resource to use it. So you still have that first kind of milestone that the grant program has. But other than that, it's much simpler and a little you can do things that are more time sensitive easily through that program. If you do work beyond the grant amount, can the additional amount be applied under the tax credit? That is a great question, and the answer is yes, it can. So anything that is not reimbursed by the commission or part of the 10% required match can then be applied for as a tax credit. So if you were to spend, let's say you have a $60,000 project, 50,000 of it is reimbursed by the commission, 5,000 is required as a match, then you have this other $5,000. You pay 10 out of pocket, but half of that was mandatory. The other half, that other $5,000, is then a eligible expense for a tax credit. So then you would get 25% of that back. Just keep really good records, I would say. We'll obviously have a record of what we reimbursed and what the match required was. So if it's the same invoice that we saw for the reimbursement and we just know, what the difference is, we can sometimes do it very easily. But if it's more complicated and there are multiple work items and things like that, just try to keep really good records so that we can very clearly say, this is what was part of the reimbursement and this is not, because we have to be able to really clearly make sure that there's no kind of double dipping happening where you're getting, the tax credit and not paying for the work because it's ultimately reimbursed. But yeah, as long as it's well documented and clear, then yes, you can definitely do that, which is people have done it, and it's a great way to just, yeah, again, sort of recoup some of that extra out-of-pocket cost. Is there a link you can put in the chat that provides more? Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. I should probably just start putting that in the PowerPoint, but um, here we go. That is at least something that I can still find fairly easily on our website. And yeah, all of that information is here. There's a link to a PDF of the program guidelines, so you can kind of see what type of stuff is eligible. It's a slightly broader scope of work items that are eligible. The grant program is mainly focused on exterior work and structural stuff, and then occasionally some system stuff, like I had mentioned HVAC. But the tax credit can be really, people get electrical work done, plumbing work, and things like that, like the more infrastructural stuff and interior rehabilitation, like folks have gotten, maybe their plaster walls repaired and things like that might not compete as well through the grant program, and they get those through the tax credit as well. So if there are certain line items that don't get funded from your grant application, that's also something to keep in mind that you can, if the planning board decides like, oh no, that's really too interior to be considered a public benefit, so we don't want to fund it through the grant program, you can probably get it funded or, uh, incentivized financially via the tax credit in that case too. So that's good to know. Um, yeah, I think that's yeah, that's pretty much the gist of that program. But obviously, if you have questions about that, you can contact me as well. I'll probably be quicker to respond if your questions about the grant program, just because we have, 30 days to get those applications in. So I want to get to those questions first. But otherwise, yeah, let me know if you have anything that comes up. If you don't think of it now and you think of it later, for sure, feel free to reach out. If you want information about the significance or any of that stuff, or if you want to check the eligibility of the property that you're thinking of applying for, shoot me an email or shoot an email to that historic preservation address and it will get forwarded to me, or someone else will do it if I'm hit by a bus. And we will let you know if the property is indeed eligible, and so on and so forth. And just thank you very much for coming. I know it's a lot of time from your schedule, but we do like to think that these help folks apply easier, and make the whole process smoother for the applicants and the reviewers and everybody else. So thank you for being here and listening to all of this to hopefully make it easier for all of those other people.